The wind screamed through Blackthorn Ridge like something alive and hunting. It tore across the Montana frontier with teeth made of ice, rattling the thick glass windows of the fortress and howling down chimneys that never seemed warm enough, no matter how much wood the servants fed into the fires. Inside the massive stone structure that dominated the valley like a judge's gavel, Celine Whitaker stood at her bedroom window, watching snow bury the world 1 inch at a time. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold bit through immediately, but she didn't pull away. The cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be something else. 8 years, 8 winters, 8 springs that came too slowly and summers that died too fast. 8 years of walking through halls wide enough for 6 men to stand shoulder to shoulder, yet somehow never wide enough for her and Riker to pass without one of them changing direction. 8 years of meals eaten in silence, of conversations that stayed frozen in her throat, of lying alone in a bed big enough for a family she'd never have. Behind her, the bedroom was exactly as it had been yesterday, and the day before that, and every day since she'd arrived at Blackthorn Ridge as a bride of 19, wearing her mother's pearls and believing duty would eventually grow into something warmer. The pearls were in a drawer now. She couldn't remember the last time she'd worn them. "Mrs. Holloway." The voice came from the doorway, quiet and careful. Martha, the head housekeeper, stood with her hands folded, her face weathered as the wooden beams holding up the fortress. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." Celine didn't turn from the window. "Will Mr. Holloway be joining us?" The pause told her everything. "He's asked for a tray in his study, ma'am. The Denver contracts need his attention." "Of course they do." Martha shifted her weight, uncomfortable. At 63, she'd served the Holloway family since Riker's mother was alive, back when the fortress had held laughter and noise and the chaos of children running through rooms that now stood empty. "Shall I set your place in the dining room, or would you prefer—" "My room is fine, Martha. Thank you." Another pause, then footsteps retreating down the hall, slow and somehow sad. Celine closed her eyes. The dining room was torture. A table built for 20 people, with her at one end and Riker at the other, so much distance between them that conversations required raising your voice like you were shouting across a canyon, and they never did. Shout, that is. They barely spoke at all. She used to try. God knows she tried. Those first months, she'd asked about his day, about the ranch operations, about the men who worked the land and the cattle that meant more to the Holloway fortune than gold. She'd offered opinions on the household, suggestions for improvements, ideas about hosting gatherings that might warm the fortress's reputation from feared to respected. Riker had listened with the same expression he wore when reviewing ledgers. Polite, distant, present in body, but absent everywhere else that mattered. Eventually, she stopped trying. The snow outside fell thicker now. Beyond the window, she could barely make out the shapes of the outbuildings, the stables, the bunkhouses where ranch hands lived, the smokehouse, the storage barns. Blackthorn Ridge wasn't just a home. It was a small kingdom carved out of wilderness by Riker's grandfather, expanded by his father, and now controlled by a man the entire valley watched with mixture of respect and fear. Riker Holloway. Land baron. Businessman. Survivor of a dozen range wars and twice as many attempts on his life. A man who'd built an empire on being harder than the next man, colder than the winter, and more ruthless than anyone willing to test him. And her husband. Celine turned from the window. Her bedroom was large, decorated in deep greens and gold that someone else had chosen before she arrived. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, carved from oak so dark it was almost black. A fireplace big enough to stand in took up another wall, flames dancing behind an iron screen. Thick rugs covered wood floors that still managed to be cold every morning. A vanity, a wardrobe, a writing desk she never used, 2 chairs positioned by the fire for conversations that never happened. A cage built from expensive materials. She walked to the vanity and looked at herself in the mirror. 27 years old. Dark hair that used to shine but now just hung there, pulled back because elaborate styles seemed pointless. Brown eyes that used to hold hope but now mostly reflected tiredness. A face that hadn't forgotten how to smile but rarely had reason to remember. The town called her beautiful. She'd heard the whispers when she accompanied Riker to settlements during those early years, before she learned that her presence at his side made him tense and irritable. "Mrs. Holloway is a handsome woman," they'd say, voices low. Shame about the situation. The situation. That's what they called it. Not the marriage or the relationship, the situation. Like she was a problem requiring a solution, a business deal gone wrong, a contract neither party could break but both regretted signing. She sat at the vanity and opened the top drawer. Inside, buried under handkerchiefs and hairpins, was a letter. She didn't need to unfold it to remember every word. Her sister had written it 6 months ago. Celine, please come home. Father's health is failing and he asks for you constantly. Whatever pride keeps you in that frozen fortress, abandon it. Life is too short to waste years in a marriage that brings you nothing but sorrow. Come home. She'd written back a careful response. Father's health concerns me deeply. I will visit when circumstances allow. Please give him my love. She hadn't visited. Circumstances never allowed, or rather, she'd stopped asking Riker for anything, including permission to travel 300 miles to see her dying father. What was the point? He'd agree with that same distant politeness, make all the arrangements, and she'd go knowing he felt relieved by her absence rather than saddened by it. So she stayed, because leaving meant admitting failure. And Celine Whitaker had been raised better than to quit, even when quitting was clearly the sane choice. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in? Martha entered, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came 2 younger women carrying trays. They set up dinner on the small table by the fire. Roasted venison, potatoes, bread still warm from the oven, winter vegetables from the root cellar, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Will there be anything else, ma'am? Martha asked. Celine looked at the food. Enough for 3 people. She'd eat a quarter of it, and they both knew it. No, thank you. This is lovely. After they left, she sat and picked at the meal. The venison was perfectly cooked, seasoned with herbs from the fortress's greenhouse. The bread was Martha's recipe, passed down from her grandmother. Everything was exactly right. She ate without tasting any of it. Through the walls, she heard sounds. Footsteps in the hallway. Doors opening and closing. The distant clatter of the kitchen staff cleaning up. Somewhere below, men's voices discussing ranch business. The fortress was alive with people and activity, yet she felt completely alone. This was her life. Had been her life. Would continue being her life until one of them died. The thought arrived with startling clarity. That's how this ended. Death. Not divorce. Impossible for people like them. People with family names that meant something and reputations to protect. Not separation. Equally impossible when your husband owned everything within 100 miles and controlled the economy of every settlement in the valley. Death was the only exit from this particular cage. She set down her fork and stared into the fire. Maybe that's why she felt so cold all the time. She was already dying, just taking her time about it. Downstairs in a study lined with leather-bound books he never read and maps of territories he'd conquered, Riker Holloway signed his name on the Denver contract and tried not to think about the woman living in his house like a ghost. He'd heard Martha's footsteps pause at Celine's door, heard the quiet exchange, heard the defeat in Martha's voice when she descended the stairs and muttered to the cook, "Another meal alone for Mrs. Holloway. That poor girl." Poor girl. As if Celine was a victim instead of exactly what she'd agreed to be 8 years ago. Riker threw down the pen harder than necessary. Ink splattered across his desk blotter, ruining papers that represented 3 months of negotiation. He swore, grabbed a cloth, made the mess worse. His study was his sanctuary. Dark wood paneling, a desk built from a single piece of walnut, chairs designed for discomfort to keep meetings short. Whiskey in the cabinet, though he rarely drank it. A gun within reach, because old habits died hard and enemies even harder. Windows that faced west, toward the mountains, away from the valley, and the people who depended on him for their survival. He was 34 years old. He'd taken control of Blackthorn Ridge when he was 22, after his father died of pneumonia during a winter even worse than this one. He'd expanded the operation, added 3,000 acres, established trade routes, survived 2 range wars and an assassination attempt that left him with a scar above his left kidney. He employed 60 men full-time, more during summer. He controlled water rights that made or broke entire settlements. He'd built something that would last beyond his lifetime. And none of it meant a damn thing when he walked past Celine's bedroom and saw light under her door, and knew she was in there alone because he'd made sure of it. He stood and walked to the window. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the valley in white that would turn gray and ugly within days. Winter in Montana wasn't beautiful. It was brutal. Survival wasn't guaranteed. Every season, someone died, froze to death caught in a storm, starved when supplies ran short, went mad from isolation. His grandfather used to say the land sorted people into two groups, those strong enough to stay and those smart enough to leave. Riker had never considered leaving. This was Holloway land, his responsibility, his burden, his prison, same as it was Celine's. The marriage had been arranged, of course, a business decision dressed up in ceremony and false sentiment. The Whitaker family owned newspapers in 3 territories. They had political connections Riker needed and money that could fund expansion. His family had land, power, and a name that opened doors. It was logical, practical, beneficial to both parties. He'd met Celine twice before the wedding, once at a party in Denver where she'd worn blue silk and laughed at something her sister said. Once at dinner where she'd asked intelligent questions about the ranch and listened to his answers with apparent interest. She was educated, well-mannered, attractive, everything appropriate for a wife. He'd thought that would be enough. The wedding was in June. She arrived at Blackthorn Ridge in a carriage loaded with trunks, wearing traveling clothes and a smile that didn't quite hide her nervousness. He'd given her a tour of the fortress, introduced her to the staff, shown her the bedroom that would be hers. Hers, not theirs. That first night, he'd stood outside her door for 15 minutes, trying to figure out what he was supposed to do. He'd been with women before. Ranch towns had saloons and women who worked in them, and he wasn't a saint. But this was different. This was his wife. This was supposed to mean something. He'd knocked. She'd opened the door in a white nightgown, her hair down, looking younger than 19, looking scared. "I thought we should talk," he'd said, his voice rough even to his own ears, "about expectations." She'd invited him in. They'd sat awkwardly in the chairs by her fireplace. He'd tried to explain that he understood this wasn't a love match, that he didn't expect her to pretend otherwise, that they could maintain separate lives under the same roof and everyone would be fine. She'd listened with that same polite interest she'd shown at dinner. Then she'd asked quietly, "But shouldn't we at least try?" Try. The word had landed in his chest like a stone in a frozen lake. "Try what?" he'd asked. "To build something, to make this work." He'd looked at her, really looked, and seen something that terrified him more than any range war or business deal gone wrong. He'd seen hope, expectation, the belief that he could be something other than what he was. "Mrs. Holloway," he'd said, formal and cold, "I can offer you security, comfort, and respect. I cannot offer you more than that." Her face had changed, hope draining away like water from a cracked basin. "I see. It's better this way, cleaner." "Cleaner," she'd repeated like she was tasting the word and finding it bitter. He'd stood. "If you need anything, tell Martha. Good night." He'd left before she could respond, closed himself in his own bedroom down the hall and poured whiskey he didn't drink while staring at walls and wondering why doing the right thing felt so wrong. That was 8 years ago. The pattern established that first night had held. They lived in the same house, ate meals separately, spoke only when necessary, maintained appearances in public. She ran the household with quiet efficiency. He ran everything else. They were polite, civil, strangers. And the whole valley whispered about why she'd never given him an heir. Riker turned from the window and poured that whiskey now. Drank it in one swallow, poured another. The truth was worse than the rumors. They whispered that she was barren, or that he was cruel, or that she took preventatives. The reality was simpler and more pathetic. They'd never once been together as husband and wife. Not that first night, not ever. He told himself it was mercy. She hadn't wanted to be here, hadn't wanted him. Forcing himself on her would have made him no better than the brutal men he despised. So he'd stayed away, maintained distance, kept everything cold and clean and uncomplicated. Except it hadn't stayed uncomplicated. Somewhere along the way, distance had calcified into something harder. Silence had become its own language. And the woman living in his house had faded from real to ghostly, a presence he felt everywhere but never touched. He heard her sometimes. At night, when the fortress settled and everyone slept, he'd hear her walking, pacing her bedroom like a caged animal. He'd stand in his own room with his ear against the wall, listening to footsteps that never came toward his door, and hate himself for not crossing the hallway and knocking. But what would he say? "I'm sorry I've given you a life you didn't want"? I'm sorry I'm better at running empires than relationships. I'm sorry I'm exactly the cold bastard everyone says I am. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Come. The door opened. James Garrett, his foreman and the closest thing he had to a friend, stepped inside. 50 years old, weathered as saddle leather, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. He'd worked for Riker's father and knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically and otherwise. Denver contracts finished? James asked, closing the door behind him. Signed and ready to ship. We'll send them with the supply wagon next week. Assuming the pass stays clear. James walked to the window, studied the snow. This keeps up. We'll be locked in until March. We've been locked in before. Not with him coming home. Riker's hand tightened on his glass. When? Telegram came this afternoon. 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on weather. James turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Your brother's coming home, Riker, after 5 years. You ready for that? Cade. His younger brother by 3 years. The reckless one. The charming one. The one who'd challenged their father's rules one too many times and gotten himself exiled for it. The one who'd written exactly 4 letters in 5 years, each one shorter and less apologetic than the last. I don't have a choice about being ready, Riker said flatly. It's his home, too. Is it? James's voice was careful. Way I remember, you told him if he left, he shouldn't bother coming back. I was angry. You were right. He nearly destroyed everything with that stunt. Cost us 2 contracts and a partnership that took years to rebuild. Riker remembered. Cade had gotten drunk, started a fight with the son of their biggest cattle buyer, and nearly killed him. The fallout had been catastrophic. Riker had given Cade an ultimatum. Stay and accept consequences, or leave and stay gone. Cade had left. People change, Riker said, though he didn't believe it. James snorted. Not that much they don't. Cade was wild then, and he's probably wilder now. You bring him back into this fortress, into this valley, and things are going to shift. People will watch, rivals will probe for weakness, and your wife, leave her out of this. Can't do that. She lives here too. Cade's going to notice what everyone else notices. And what's that? James gave him a look that was equal parts pity and frustration. That you've locked yourself and that poor woman in a cage neither of you deserves. That this fortress is colder inside than out. That something's got to break eventually, and when it does, it's going to be loud. Riker set down his glass with controlled force. Is there anything else?
Yeah, Martha asked me to mention that Mrs. Holloway ate alone again tonight. 4th time this week. Woman's wasting away to nothing, and everyone's pretending not to notice. I'm aware of the situation.
Are you? Because from where I stand, you're working real hard to stay unaware. James moved toward the door, then paused. Your grandfather built this place with his bare hands. Your father defended it with blood. You've expanded it with brains and guts. But none of that means anything if you let it stay empty of everything that makes a house a home. You think on that. He left before Riker could respond. The study fell quiet again. Riker stood alone with his whiskey and his contracts and the sound of snow hitting windows. James was wrong. The fortress wasn't empty. It was full of staff, of history, of purpose. But as Riker stood there listening to the wind howl and the old building creak, he couldn't shake the feeling that James was also right. Besides, 3 floors above Riker's study, in a narrow bedroom in the servants' wing, Martha sat on her bed and wrote a letter she'd never send. Dear Mrs. Holloway's mother, your daughter is dying. Not quickly, not obviously, but dying all the same. She walks these halls like a woman already buried, and none of us knows how to save her. I've served this family for 40 years. I watched Riker grow from boy to man, and he's the finest employer I've ever had. Fair, generous, honorable in every way except one. He doesn't know how to love. Maybe nobody taught him. Maybe the frontier beat it out of him. Maybe he's scared of it. I don't know. But I watch him pretend not to watch her, and I watch her pretend not to hope he's watching, and I'm too old and too tired to keep witnessing this particular slow-motion catastrophe. Something's got to give. Cade's coming home, and that boy's always been gasoline looking for a match. When he sees what's happening here, he's going to light fires nobody's prepared to handle. I'm afraid of what happens next, but I'm more afraid of what happens if nothing changes at all. She folded the letter and tucked it into her Bible, where she kept all the letters she wrote and never sent. Then she prayed, not to save the marriage, but to save the people trapped inside it before the cold claimed them both. Tick. The storm intensified overnight. By morning, snow had drifted 6 feet high against the fortress walls, and the temperature dropped low enough that water left in basins froze solid. The staff moved through their routines, feeding fires, preparing meals, tending animals in the barn, with the grim efficiency of people who'd survived worse winters and knew better than to complain. Celine woke to find frost patterns on her windows so thick she couldn't see outside. For a moment, wrapped in blankets and half asleep, she let herself imagine she was somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere she mattered. Then Martha knocked, and reality reasserted itself. "Good morning, ma'am. I've brought breakfast and hot water." Celine sat up. Her bedroom was cold despite the fire that had burned all night. "Thank you, Martha." The older woman set down a tray and began pouring water into the basin. "Storm's worse than expected. Mr. Holloway says we're not to send anyone to the settlements until it passes." "Is everyone accounted for? All staff present and safe? Animals are secure? We have supplies for 3 months if needed." 3 months. Trapped in the fortress with Riker and silence and walls that pressed closer every day. "Ma'am?" Martha's voice softened. "Are you well?" Celine looked at her, really looked. Martha's face showed concern, kindness, and something else. Worry. The kind of worry you show when you're watching someone fade. "I'm fine," Celine lied. "Just tired." "You're always tired lately." "It's winter. Everyone's tired in winter." Martha didn't argue, but her expression said she didn't believe it either. She finished setting up breakfast, then hesitated at the door. "There's news, ma'am. I thought you should hear it from me rather than through gossip." Celine's stomach tightened. "What news?" "Mr. Holloway's brother is coming home. Cade. He's been gone 5 years, and now he's returning. Cade Holloway." Celine searched her memory. She'd heard stories, reckless, charming, trouble. He'd left before she learned much about him. "When?" 2 or 3 weeks, depending on travel. Mr. Holloway received word yesterday." "I see. Thank you for telling me." After Martha left, Celine sat with her breakfast cooling and thought about what it meant to have another person in the fortress, another presence, another set of eyes watching the slow-motion failure of her marriage. She didn't know whether to dread it or welcome it. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the silence held. And somewhere between the two, Celine felt the first small crack in the ice that had frozen her in place for 8 years. She didn't know yet that cracks spread, that ice, once broken, couldn't be made whole again, that the return of Cade Holloway was about to turn Blackthorn Ridge from a frozen fortress into a battlefield where silence was no longer an option, and the truth, no matter how brutal, would finally be forced into the light. All she knew was that something was shifting. The air felt different, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. And in the valley below, where settlements huddled against winter's assault, people who'd watched the Holloway fortress for years felt it too. Something was changing at Blackthorn Ridge. Something was breaking. They didn't know whether to pray for the people inside or run before the explosion. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning when the snow had finally stopped falling, but the cold had settled in so deep that breathing hurt. Celine was in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed room on the south side of the fortress that caught whatever weak sunlight winter allowed, when she heard the commotion downstairs. Voices rising, boots on hardwood, the kind of disruption that only happened when something significant was occurring. She set down her book, a novel she'd been staring at without reading for the past hour, and walked to the conservatory entrance. Below, in the main hall, she could see ranch hands clustered around someone, their voices carrying up through the cold air. "Didn't think you'd actually show." 5 years. Damn near thought you were dead." "Boss know you're here?" Then a voice she didn't recognize, warm and edged with laughter. "Where's the fun in sending advance warning? Someone get my bags. And tell me you've got hot food because I've been eating trail rations for 3 weeks and I'm about ready to gnaw on furniture." Cade. He was early. Celine watched from above as the group moved through the hall. She caught glimpses, a tall figure in a heavy coat, dark hair, longer than was fashionable, easy movements that spoke of confidence or recklessness, or both. The men around him seemed energized, like someone had lit a match in a room that had been dark too long. Then Martha appeared, her face showing surprise and something close to joy. "Cade Holloway, is that really you?" "In the frozen flesh, Martha. You're still the prettiest woman in Montana, I see. And you're still full of nonsense." But Martha was smiling, actually smiling, in a way Celine hadn't seen in months. "You look half-starved. Come, I'll get you fed while someone finds your brother." The group moved toward the kitchen, voices fading. Celine remained where she was, gripping the conservatory doorframe, trying to understand why her heart was beating faster. It was just another person in the fortress. That's all. Nothing to feel nervous about. But she was nervous. Or something like it. Some feeling she'd forgotten how to name after years of feeling nothing much at all. She returned to her chair and picked up the book again. The words still didn't make sense. Outside the glass walls, the valley stretched white and brutal and beautiful in its harshness. Inside, she could hear the fortress waking up in a way it hadn't in years. 20 minutes later, she heard Riker's footsteps. She'd learned to recognize them, measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who never hurried because hurrying suggested panic, and panic suggested weakness. The footsteps paused outside the conservatory, and for one strange moment she thought he might come in. He didn't. The footsteps continued downstairs. Celine closed her eyes and told herself it didn't hurt. After 8 years, it shouldn't hurt. But the small wounds never fully healed. They just accumulated until you were walking around bleeding from 1,000 tiny cuts nobody could see. That evening, dinner was different. For the first time in 8 years, Celine received a summons. Martha delivered it personally, looking uncertain. "Mr. Holloway requests your presence at dinner tonight, ma'am. In the dining room. He says it's important." Celine looked up from the embroidery she'd been destroying. Her stitches were uneven, her thread tangled. She was terrible at embroidery, but kept doing it because it was something to occupy her hands during the endless hours. "Did he say why?" "His brother's arrived. I expect he wants you to meet him properly." So this was it. The performance. The dutiful wife appearing beside the powerful husband to present the illusion of a functional marriage. She'd done it before at formal gatherings in the settlements, standing beside Riker while he conducted business, smiling and nodding and pretending they hadn't spent the entire carriage ride in silence. "Tell him I'll be there," Celine said quietly. After Martha left, she sat staring at her ruined embroidery. Then, in a sudden burst of frustration, she threw it into the fire and watched it burn. An hour later, she descended the stairs wearing a dark green dress that made her look paler than she was. She'd taken time with her hair, then undone it, and pulled it back simply, refusing to perform more than absolutely necessary. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed a woman who looked composed and empty. Good enough. The dining room doors were open, light and voices spilling out. She paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. The massive table that usually felt like a desert between her and Riker now held 3 place settings, clustered at one end, candles burned in silver holders. Someone had brought in pine branches, and the room smelled like winter forest instead of dust and disuse. Riker stood by the window, speaking with a man who had his back to the door. She recognized him by the description she'd pieced together from servant gossip. Tall, rangy build, dark hair that needed cutting, clothes more suited to a ranch hand than the brother of a land baron. Riker saw her first. His expression did something complicated that she'd learned not to try to interpret. Celine, not Mrs. Holloway, just her name, said in that careful tone he used when other people were present, and he needed to maintain the fiction that they were actually married in any meaningful sense. The other man turned. Cade Holloway looked nothing like his brother. Where Riker was built solid and moved with controlled precision, Cade was leaner and looser, like he'd never learned to hold himself rigid against the world. His face was handsome in a way that probably caused problems. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that were too knowing and currently studying her with undisguised interest. "So you're the famous Mrs. Holloway," Cade said, and his voice matched his appearance. Easy, warm, dangerous in its friendliness. 5 years of letters that mentioned you exactly 3 times, and even then only in the context of wife is well. I was starting to think Riker had invented you. Celine felt her face heat. She wasn't used to being looked at. Not like this. Not like she was visible. "Mr. Holloway, welcome home." "Cade, please. We're family after all." He crossed the room with quick strides and took her hand, not shaking it, but holding it briefly with both of his own. His hands were warm. When was the last time someone had touched her? And my brother's manners have apparently frozen along with everything else. "You look cold." Are you cold? This place is like a tomb. Cade, Riker's voice carried warning. What? It's true. I've been back 4 hours and I've already added 3 layers. Cade released Celine's hand and turned to his brother. When did you decide that suffering was a virtue? Because I remember when this place felt like a home instead of a prison. Things change when you're not here to set them on fire. The words were harsh, but something in Riker's tone made them almost affectionate. Almost. Celine watched the two brothers face each other and saw something she couldn't name. History. Resentment. The kind of bond that survives years of absence and comes back snarled but unbroken. Should we sit? She asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Before the food gets cold? Dinner was the strangest meal Celine had experienced since arriving at Blackthorn Ridge. Cade talked constantly, filling the silence that usually dominated the dining room with stories about his travels. He'd been everywhere, California, Texas, even down to Mexico. He'd worked ranches, hired his gun a few times, played poker in towns with names like Last Chance and Devil's Creek. Nearly got married in Santa Fe, he said, cutting into venison with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been hungry too long. Beautiful woman, daughter of a cattle baron twice as mean as Riker. Lasted 3 weeks before she realized I was trouble and her father threatened to shoot me. Probably the smartest decision she ever made. You always did have a talent for finding trouble, Riker said. Talent implies effort. I don't have to look for it. It just appears. Like magic. Cade turned to Celine. What about you, Mrs. Holloway? Do you find trouble, or does it find you? The question was casual, but his eyes weren't. He was watching her carefully, like he could see past the composed exterior to whatever was breaking underneath. I avoid it, Celine said carefully. Trouble rarely leads anywhere productive. Depends on your definition of productive. Some of my best memories involve terrible decisions. Cade took a drink of wine, then added, though looking around this fortress, I'm guessing terrible decisions aren't encouraged here. They're not, Riker said flatly. Explains a lot. The tension that had been building snapped tighter. Celine felt it across the table, saw Riker's jaw tighten, and Cade's smile sharpen. They were heading toward an argument, the kind that would turn dinner into a battlefield. How long are you planning to stay? She asked quickly, redirecting before things escalated. Cade shifted his attention back to her. Honestly, I don't know. Came back because I was tired of running, and this is home, whether my brother wants me here or not. But I haven't figured out the long-term plan yet. There are positions available, Riker said carefully. If you're interested in working. Working for you, you mean? Working with me. There's a difference. Is there? Cade leaned back in his chair. Because from where I sit, everything in this valley works for you. You're the sun and the rest of us are just planets in orbit, hoping you don't decide to burn us out. Celine saw Riker's expression close down, watched him retreat behind the cold mask he wore when emotions threatened. She'd seen it 1,000 times, but this time it bothered her more than usual. Why couldn't he just fight back? Why couldn't he just feel something visible instead of locking everything away? That's not fair, she said, and both men looked at her in surprise. She'd barely spoken all dinner, and now she was defending Riker? Your brother works harder than anyone. Everything he does is for this ranch, this valley. If people depend on him, it's because he's proven he won't let them down. Silence fell. Cade studied her with renewed interest. Riker looked stunned, like she'd suddenly started speaking a language he didn't know. Well, Cade said finally, there's fire under that ice after all. Good. I was starting to worry my brother had married a statue. Celine felt her face burn. She set down her fork with shaking hands. Excuse me, I'm not feeling well. She stood and walked out before either of them could respond. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as she climbed the stairs, faster and faster, until she reached her room and closed the door behind her with more force than necessary. Inside, the fire had burned low. She didn't bother building it back up. Instead, she stood at the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass, trying to understand why she was shaking. She'd defended Riker. After 8 years of silence, after he'd given her nothing but distance and empty courtesy, she'd defended him. And the worst part was, she'd meant it. She did believe he worked hard, that he carried responsibilities that would break lesser men, that he wasn't the cruel tyrant some people claimed. But that didn't make their marriage less of a failure. It just made the failure more complicated. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ma'am, It's Martha. May I come in? Celine opened the door. Martha entered with a tea tray and enough worried mothering to make Celine want to cry. Don't, Celine said, her voice rough. Don't be kind to me right now. Then I won't be kind. I'll be honest instead. Martha set down the tray and turned to face her. That man downstairs, Cade Holloway, he's going to stir things up. He's always been good at seeing what others want to ignore, and right now he's seeing what we've all seen for years. What's that? That you're dying inside this fortress, and Mr. Holloway's pretending not to notice even though it's killing him too. Celine shook her head. Riker doesn't care. He's made that very clear. Has he? Because from where I stand, he cares too much and doesn't know what to do about it. So he does nothing, which is worse than doing the wrong thing. Why are you telling me this? Martha's expression softened. Because someone needs to. And because Cade's return is going to force issues that have been buried too long. You can keep pretending nothing's wrong, or you can face the truth before it explodes in everyone's face. Your choice. After Martha left, Celine sat with her tea cooling and thought about choices. She'd made one 8 years ago when she agreed to marry Riker Holloway. She'd made another every day since when she accepted the loneliness and silence as the price of duty. Maybe it was time to make a different choice. She didn't know what that would look like yet, but something had shifted tonight. Some door that had been closed had cracked open, and she couldn't make herself close it again. Downstairs, Riker and Cade sat in uncomfortable silence after Celine's departure. The dining room felt larger and colder without her presence, which made no sense since she'd barely spoken. You want to tell me what that was about? Cade finally asked. What? Your wife defending you, then running out like the room was on fire. The whole thing felt... Cade searched for words. Wrong. Like watching actors perform a script nobody remembers writing. Riker stood and walked to the sideboard, poured whiskey he didn't want. You've been gone 5 years. Things change. Do they? Because from what I can see, nothing's changed except everyone's gotten sadder. Cade joined him at the sideboard, took the bottle, poured his own glass. I remember when this place had life in it. When father was alive and mother was running household, and you weren't locked up tighter than a bank vault. What happened? I grew up. That's not growing up, that's giving up. Riker turned on him, anger flaring hot and quick. You don't get to walk in here after 5 years and judge how I've lived my life. Someone needs to. You married a beautiful woman and you're treating her like furniture. You built an empire, but you're living in it alone. You've got everything anyone could want, and you look more miserable than when we were kids and father was drinking himself mean. Cade set down his glass with a sharp crack. I came back because this is home. But if home means watching you both slowly freeze to death, maybe I should have stayed gone. Then leave. Nobody's keeping you here. Except I am staying, because someone needs to care enough to tell you the truth, even if you don't want to hear it. Riker felt something break inside him, some dam he'd built carefully over years. You want the truth? Fine. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be what she needs. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am, and what I am is apparently not enough. So I do my job, I keep everyone safe and fed and employed, and I accept that I failed at the one thing that was supposed to be simple. Happy now? The confession left him breathless. He'd never said it out loud before, never admitted to anyone, including himself, that he'd failed, that he was failing, that he'd taken a young woman's life and turned it into a prison sentence. Cade looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. What the hell is funny? Riker demanded. You're standing here acting like you've committed some unforgivable crime when the solution is so simple a child could see it. There is no solution. Yes, there is. You talk to her. You tell her what you just told me. You stop hiding behind this fortress and these rules and this idea that you're supposed to be something superhuman. Cade gripped his shoulder, the first real touch between them since he'd arrived. You're my brother and I love you, but you're also an idiot. That woman upstairs isn't asking for perfection. She's asking to be seen, and you're so busy protecting her from yourself that you can't see she's disappearing. Riker pulled away. You don't understand. Maybe not. But I understand one thing. Whatever you're doing now isn't working, so either change it or accept that you're going to lose her. Not to death or distance, but to the slow erosion of hope. And once hope's gone, brother, there's nothing left. Cade walked out, leaving Riker alone in the dining room with empty plates and words that landed like punches. He stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Fear. Regret. The terrible understanding that his brother was right. That he'd been so focused on not hurting Celine that he'd hurt her worse than any intentional cruelty could have managed. Eventually, he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, paused outside Celine's door, raised his hand to knock, lowered it again. Not tonight. He wasn't ready, didn't know what to say, would probably make things worse. All the same excuses he'd used for 8 years. He went to his own room and lay awake until dawn, listening to Celine pace on the other side of the wall and hating himself for not crossing the distance between them. The next morning brought new snow and new tensions. Word spread through the fortress that Cade Holloway was back, and the staff responded with the kind of energy that comes from novelty-breaking monotony. Suddenly there was laughter in the kitchen, stories being traded in hallways, a lightness that had been missing. Celine felt it as she moved through her morning routine. The fortress itself seemed different, like Cade's presence had changed the air pressure or broken some spell. She found him in the conservatory after breakfast, standing among her plants and looking completely out of place in his trail-worn clothes among the careful greenery. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, turning when he heard her footsteps. "I was hoping I'd find you. Wanted to apologize for last night." "You didn't do anything wrong. I made you uncomfortable, called you a statue, which was unforgivable." He walked toward her, his movements easy in the glass-walled space. "Truth is, I don't know you at all, but I know my brother, and I know when someone's unhappy. You seem unhappy." Celine should have been offended by his directness. Instead, she felt something close to relief. "Your brother and I have an arrangement. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Because from the outside, it looks pretty simple. Two people married who don't talk to each other, living in separate worlds under the same roof. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Cade leaned against the workbench where she kept her gardening tools. "Look, I know I'm the reckless brother, the troublemaker, the one who left and stayed gone because staying was too hard, but I also know what it looks like when someone's given up hope. And last night, when you ran out of that dining room, I saw it." Celine turned away, focusing on a fern that needed trimming. "Why do you care?" "Because I don't like seeing people suffer when it doesn't have to be that way. And because Riker's my brother and watching him destroy himself over pride or fear or whatever's keeping him locked up is getting old." He paused. "Also because you defended him last night when you didn't have to, which means you still care. And if you still care, maybe there's something worth saving. You make it sound easy." "I didn't say easy. I said possible. There's a difference." Celine set down her shears and faced him. "Your brother doesn't want to be saved. He's made that choice very clear for 8 years. "Has he? Or has he just been too scared to try?" Cade's expression turned serious. "I saw him after you left. He looked like someone had punched him, not angry, broken. Whatever he's telling himself about why your marriage is the way it is, he doesn't believe it anymore. If he ever did." Hope was dangerous. Celine had learned that lesson thoroughly, but Cade's words planted something anyway, some small seed that wanted to believe change was possible. "What do you suggest I do?" she asked quietly. "Stop accepting the silence. Stop pretending everything's fine. Start pushing back. Make him see you." Cade smiled slightly. "Or you could always run away with me. I'm heading to California eventually. Could use the company." She laughed despite herself. "That's your solution? Run away? Worked for me once, but honestly, no. You don't strike me as a runner. You strike me as someone who fights when pushed far enough. So maybe it's time to get pushed." Before Celine could respond, footsteps approached. Riker appeared in the conservatory doorway, his expression carefully neutral when he saw them together. "Cade, I need to speak with you about the North Range." "Now?" "Now." Cade glanced at Celine, then back at his brother. Something passed between them. Challenge, understanding, old grievances never fully resolved. "Sure. Let's talk about the North Range, or whatever you actually want to talk about." He followed Riker out, leaving Celine alone with her plants and her thoughts, and a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something close. Something that felt like possibility wearing a disguise. That afternoon, the valley's rumor mill started churning. Cade made the mistake, or deliberate choice, of riding into the nearest settlement with 3 ranch hands. Within hours, word spread that the prodigal Holloway brother was back, that he was causing tension at the fortress, that Mrs. Holloway had been seen talking to him in private. None of it was accurate, but accuracy didn't matter when gossip was more interesting than truth. By evening, James Garrett appeared in Riker's study with news. The Blackwell clan's been asking questions. Riker looked up from the land surveys he'd been reviewing. What kind of questions? About Cade, about stability at Blackthorn Ridge, about whether your marriage is as solid as you claim. James sat without invitation, his weathered face showing concern. They're probing for weakness, testing whether the rumors about you and Mrs. Holloway are true. What rumors? The ones that have existed since she arrived and failed to produce an heir. That the marriage is a facade. That you're too cold or she's too barren, or you both made a mistake neither of you knows how to fix. James held up a hand before Riker could respond. I know they're lies, but lies repeated often enough start sounding like truth. And with Cade back stirring things up, people are watching closer. Riker felt rage building, the cold kind that made him dangerous. Let them watch. That's not enough anymore. The Blackwells own 3,000 acres bordering your western range. They've been trying to expand for years, and you've blocked them every time. Now they're seeing opportunity. Your brother returns after years of exile, your wife barely speaks to you in public, and you're acting like none of it matters. It doesn't matter. Our private life is private. Not when you're Riker Holloway, not when half the valley depends on your stability to maintain their own. James leaned forward. I'm not saying you need to fix your marriage for politics. I'm saying that whether you like it or not, your personal life affects everything. And right now, people are doubting you for the first time in years. After James left, Riker sat in darkness and faced the truth. He'd spent 8 years telling himself that maintaining distance from Celine was merciful, that keeping their arrangement cold and professional protected them both. But mercy that looked like neglect was just cruelty with better branding. And protection that felt like abandonment didn't protect anything at all. He thought about walking upstairs, knocking on her door, finally saying the words that had been trapped in his throat for nearly a decade. Instead, he poured whiskey and worked until midnight, telling himself that tomorrow would be better, that he'd find the right moment, the right words. He'd been telling himself the same lie for 8 years. That night, Celine couldn't sleep. She lay in darkness, listening to the fortress settle, thinking about Cade's words and the way Riker had looked when he found them together in the conservatory. Like he'd wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. She remembered the early days, those first weeks after she'd arrived when she still believed duty could become affection and arrangement could become partnership. She'd tried so hard, asked questions, offered companionship, reached out in every way she knew how. And Riker had met every attempt with polite distance, until eventually she'd stopped trying because rejection hurt less when you stopped hoping. But maybe she'd given up too easily. Maybe she'd accepted his silence as final when it was actually something else. Fear, like Cade suggested. Or maybe just ignorance, a man so used to controlling everything through strength that he didn't know how to handle something requiring softness. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Riker's footsteps, measured and heavy. They approached her door, stopped. She held her breath, waiting, hoping. One knock. That's all it would take. One knock and she'd open the door and maybe they could finally talk about the wreckage of their marriage instead of living in it. The footsteps continued past her door to his own room. The door closed with quiet finality. Celine rolled onto her side and stared at the wall between them. 8 years of that wall. 8 years of almost moments that never quite happened. 8 years of 2 people trapped in the same prison, each thinking they were protecting the other while actually just making everything worse. Something had to change. Cade was right about that much. But change required courage, and Celine wasn't sure she had any left. Survival had exhausted her. Hope had broken her. The idea of trying again, of opening herself up to more disappointment, felt impossible. But so did continuing like this. She fell asleep sometime before dawn, caught between resignation and rebellion, not knowing which side would win when she woke up. Not knowing that the choice was about to be made for her, because in 3 days a storm would hit that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the inevitable explosion when people who've been silent too long are finally forced to speak. 3 days after Cade's arrival, the Blackwell clan made their move. It started with a message delivered by a rider half frozen from traveling through morning snow. James brought it directly to Riker's study. his expression grim enough that Riker knew before opening the envelope that trouble had arrived wearing an official seal. The letter was brief and deliberately insulting. Thomas Blackwell, patriarch of the neighboring ranch and a man who'd resented Holloway dominance for 2 decades, was demanding a meeting to discuss boundary disputes and water rights that have been ignored too long. The subtext was clear. He thought Riker was distracted, weakened by personal problems, vulnerable enough to push. "He's testing you," James said, standing by the window. "Wants to see if the rumors about instability here have teeth." Riker read the letter again, searching for angles. The boundaries were settled 5 years ago. There's no dispute. There is if he decides to create one. And with spring coming, water rights are always contentious. James turned from the window. "He's picked his moment carefully. Your brother just returned. The whole valley's talking about your marriage, and you've been distracted enough that people noticed. He thinks you're off balance." "Then he's wrong." "Is he? Because from where I stand, you've been off balance for years. You've just been good at hiding it." The truth of that statement hit harder than Riker wanted to admit. He set down the letter with careful precision, fighting the urge to crumple it. "Set up the meeting. Here, not at his place. 3 days from now. Make sure he knows we're not coming to him." "You're bringing Mrs. Holloway?" The question surprised him. "Why would I bring her?" "Because Blackwell will have his wife there. They always present as a united front, and it's one of his strengths. Man's a viper, but his marriage is solid and everyone knows it." James paused. "Showing up without your wife sends a message about the state of yours." Riker wanted to argue, wanted to say that Celine's presence or absence was irrelevant to business. But James was right. Perception mattered. And right now the perception was that Riker Holloway's personal life was falling apart, which made him weak, which made him a target. "I'll discuss it with her," he said finally. "Will you? Because discussing things with your wife doesn't seem to be something you do much of." James's voice carried no judgment, just observation. "Maybe start there. Talk to the woman you married. See if she wants to help, or if she'd rather watch you handle everything alone like you have been." After James left, Riker sat at his desk and stared at nothing. Talk to Celine. Simple advice that felt impossible. They'd mastered the art of not talking, perfected silence into a routine so established that breaking it required more courage than facing down armed rivals. But James was right. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about their lives, their futures. The question of whether they could continue existing in the same space without eventually destroying each other through sheer accumulated neglect. He stood, walked to the door, then stopped. What would he even say? How did you start a conversation with someone you'd been avoiding for 8 years? Where did you begin unpacking that much failure? Footsteps in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Kate appeared, looking windblown and energized from riding. "Just came from the northern settlement. People are talking." "People are always talking. Not like this. The Blackwells have been spreading rumors, saying you're losing control, that your brother came back because the family's falling apart, that Mrs. Holloway's miserable and everyone knows it." Cade dropped into a chair without invitation. "They're building a narrative, brother, and if you don't counter it, it's going to stick." Riker felt rage building again, the cold, methodical kind that made him dangerous. "Let them talk. I've dealt with worse." "Have you?" "Because usually when people attack, it's your business or your land. This time they're attacking your marriage, your wife. That's different." "Celine has nothing to do with any of this." "Doesn't she?" Cade leaned forward. "She's been part of this from the beginning. You married her for political reasons, kept her at arm's length for personal ones, and now everyone's watching to see if the arrangement's about to collapse. That makes her relevant, whether you like it or not. I don't need you to tell me how to handle my marriage." "Clearly you do, since you've been mishandling it for years." Cade's voice sharpened. "I love you, but I'm not going to watch you destroy yourself through stubbornness. You want to fight the Blackwells? Fine, but you can't do it while pretending your personal life doesn't matter. Everything's connected, and right now the weakest part of your armor is the wife you won't talk to and the marriage you won't fix." Riker wanted to throw him out, wanted to retreat into the cold control that had served him so well for so long. But something stopped him. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the slow realization that everyone around him could see what he'd been denying. Maybe just the weight of 8 years of mistakes piling up until he couldn't carry them anymore. "What do you suggest I do?" he asked quietly. "Talk to her. Actually talk.
Not about household management or social obligations, but about what went wrong and whether either of you wants to fix it. Cade stood. And do it before the Blackwell meeting, because if you show up without her or with the same cold distance everyone's used to seeing, you're handing them exactly what they want. That evening, Riker stood outside Celine's door for the third time in as many days. This time he forced himself to knock before he could retreat. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened and Celine stood there in a simple dress, her hair down, looking surprised and wary and tired. Riker. His name and her voice sounded strange. They were formal with each other, even in private, Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Holloway, like they were business associates instead of people who'd promised to build a life together. "I need to speak with you," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "May I come in?" She hesitated, and in that pause he saw 8 years of disappointment, 8 years of doors that stayed closed and conversations that never happened. Then she stepped back. Of course. Her room looked the same as it always did, neat, organized, empty of personal touches beyond the minimum. It could have been a guest room except for the embroidery hoop on the chair and the book on the nightstand. Evidence of someone living there, but barely. He'd done this to her, reduced her to existing instead of living. "There's a situation developing," he started, then stopped. This wasn't how he wanted to begin. Not with business, not with obligation. "No, that's not... I need to say something first." Celine sat in one of the chairs by the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap, waiting, guarded. "All right, I've been a coward." The words came out harsh, unpolished. He wasn't good at this. Didn't have practice confessing failure. 8 years ago, I told myself I was protecting you by keeping distance between us, that you didn't want this marriage any more than I knew how to have one, so the kind thing was to leave you alone. But I was wrong. I wasn't being kind, I was being afraid. And I let that fear turn into habit, and habit into years, until we ended up here. Living separate lives, barely speaking, pretending we have a marriage when we both know it's a lie. Celine stared at him like he'd started speaking another language. Her composure cracked, showing something raw underneath. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because I can't keep pretending anymore. Because the Blackwells are using our situation as ammunition. Because my brother came home and pointed out what everyone's been too polite to say directly, that we're both miserable, and it's my fault." "It's not just your fault." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I could have fought harder, could have refused to accept the distance. But I was young and scared, and eventually I just gave up. We both did." Riker moved closer, not sitting but standing near enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I know that continuing like we have been is killing us both. You're wasting away in this fortress, and I'm watching it happen while telling myself there's nothing I can do. That's unacceptable." "What changed?" she asked. "Why now, after all this time?" "Cade, the Blackwells, everything happening at once, but mostly..." He stopped, searching for honesty. "Mostly watching you defend me at dinner when you had no reason to. Realizing you still care enough to be angry, which means maybe there's something left to salvage." Celine stood, and he saw she was shaking slightly. "You want to know what changed for me? I'll tell you. I stopped hoping. I buried the parts of me that wanted more than duty and obligation and empty courtesy. I learned to live small because living any other way in this house felt impossible. And now you're standing here saying we should try to fix things, and I don't know if I can survive hoping again." The pain in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Riker had seen violence, had watched men die, had carried burdens that would have broken others. But hearing his wife describe how their marriage had slowly murdered her hope was worse than anything he'd experienced. "I'm not asking you to hope," he said carefully. "I'm asking if you're willing to fight, not for what we were supposed to be, but for what we might become if we stop hiding from each other. And if we fail, then at least we'll fail honestly instead of living this lie." He paused, then added what scared him most. "The Blackwells want a meeting in 3 days. They're testing our stability, looking for weaknesses. James says I should bring you, show a united front, but I won't ask you to perform for politics if you can't stand to be near me. That's your choice." Celine was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said something that surprised him. "I'll go."
Not because of the Blackwells or Valley politics, but because I'm tired of hiding too. If we're going to fail, I'd rather fail trying than fail by doing nothing. Something eased in Riker's chest. Not hope. He didn't deserve that yet. But maybe the possibility of hope. The first crack in 8 years of ice. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We don't know if this changes anything." She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of protection. "You should go. I need time to think." He wanted to stay, wanted to keep talking, to say all the things he'd left unsaid for years. But pushing now would be a mistake. Small steps. That's all he could ask for. "Good night, Celine." "Good night." He left, closing the door behind him, and stood in the hallway feeling more unsteady than he had in years. The conversation had gone better and worse than expected. Better because she'd agreed to try. Worse because he'd seen clearly what his cowardice had cost her. 3 doors down, Cade stepped out of his own room, clearly having heard everything through the thin walls. "That's a start? You were listening?" "Hard not to. Fortress has terrible acoustics." Cade walked over, his expression serious for once. "You know that was the easy part, right? Admitting you were wrong. The hard part's actually changing." "I know." "Do you? Because I've watched you control everything through sheer willpower and determination. But you can't control this. You can't force a relationship to work. It requires something you're not good at. Vulnerability. Letting someone see you fail." Riker leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Why did you really come back, Cade?" "Honestly? I missed home. Missed family. Spent 5 years running and realized I was just running in circles." Cade smiled slightly. "Also, maybe I wanted to see if my cold, controlled brother was actually human underneath all that armor. Turns out you are. That's progress. Doesn't feel like progress. Feels like everything's falling apart. Maybe it needs to fall apart before you can rebuild it properly." Cade clapped his shoulder. "Get some sleep. You look terrible." After Cade left, Riker went to his room but didn't sleep. He lay awake listening to sounds from Celine's room, movement, footsteps, the window opening briefly, then closing again. She was restless too. Both of them trapped in separate rooms, separate lives, trying to figure out if 8 years of mistakes could be undone or if they'd waited too long. Morning arrived gray and cold. Word had spread about the upcoming Blackwell meeting, and the fortress buzzed with nervous energy. Ranch hands speculated about what Thomas Blackwell wanted. Kitchen staff gossiped about whether Mrs. Holloway would attend. Everyone could sense something building, some confrontation that would settle more than just business disputes. Celine spent the morning in the conservatory, pretending to tend plants while actually trying to understand what she'd agreed to. Fighting for a marriage that had never really existed. Standing beside a man who'd kept her at distance for 8 years. Opening herself up to more disappointment. She must be losing her mind. "You're going to kill that fern if you keep cutting it," Martha said from the doorway. Celine looked down. She'd trimmed the same branch 3 times, leaving it bare and damaged. "I'm distracted." "So I see." Martha entered with tea and the kind of knowing expression that made Celine both grateful and uncomfortable. "Heard Mr. Holloway visited your room last night. Long conversation according to the staff who weren't supposed to be listening. News travels fast. Always does in this place. Too many people with too little to occupy them except other people's business." Martha set down the tea tray. "You going to tell me what happened, or should I rely on gossip?" Celine set down her shears and faced the older woman who'd been more mother than employer for 8 years. He apologized. Said he'd been a coward. Asked if I was willing to try to fix things. And I said yes, even though I don't know what that means or how to do it, or if it's even possible after this much time. Martha sat in the other chair, moving with the careful precision of someone whose bones ached in cold weather. "Love me or hate me for saying this, but I'm going to anyway. That man upstairs has made mistakes, big ones. But he's trying now, and trying counts for something. Question is whether you can meet him halfway, or if you're too hurt to risk it. I don't know if I can trust him." "Then don't. Not yet. Trust has to be earned back, and that takes time." Martha poured tea with steady hands. "But you can choose to stop actively retreating. That's not the same as trusting. That's just stopping the bleeding long enough to see if healing's possible." Celine took the offered tea and thought about bleeding. She'd been bleeding for years, small wounds that never closed, accumulating until she felt empty. The idea of stopping that process, even without guarantees of healing, was tempting in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "The Blackwell meeting's in 3 days," she said quietly. "Riker wants me there. A united front." "And you'll go?" I said I would. She sipped tea that was too hot, welcoming the burn. "Though I suspect I'll regret it. These things never go well." Martha smiled slightly. "Maybe this time will be different. Stranger things have happened." That afternoon brought the first sign that strange things were indeed happening. Celine was in the library, searching for a book she'd never read, when she encountered Riker doing the same thing. They both froze, caught in the awkwardness of sharing space without the usual escape routes available. "I didn't realize you were in here," Riker said, his hand still on a shelf. "I can leave." "No, He stopped, visibly struggled with something, then said, "I'd like it if you stayed, if you're comfortable with that." Comfortable was a strong word, but Celine nodded and continued browsing, acutely aware of him across the room. They existed in silence for several minutes, the kind that usually felt oppressive but now just felt uncertain. I spoke with James about the Blackwell situation," Riker said eventually, not looking at her. "They're claiming water rights issues, but it's a pretext. What they really want is to test whether I'm vulnerable enough to push, whether family problems have made me weak." "Have they?" He turned to face her then, and she was struck by how tired he looked. "Yes. I've been distracted, made mistakes in judgment, let things slip that I normally wouldn't, but not because my family's falling apart, because I'm finally facing that it already did, and I don't know how to fix it." Celine set down the book she'd been holding. "What do you need from me at this meeting?" "Honestly, I don't know. Support, I suppose. The appearance that we're solid, even though we both know we're not. Another performance." "No." His voice was firm. "I'm done with performances. I need—" He struggled with the words. "I need my wife beside me. Not playing a role, but actually there. If you can do that without it costing you too much." The vulnerability in his admission caught her off guard. This was so different from the man who'd spent 8 years locked behind cold courtesy. Different enough that she took a risk. "I'll be there," she said. "Actually there, like you said, not performing." "Why?" "Because you're trying. Because I'm tired of being angry. Because maybe Cade's right, and we've been so busy protecting ourselves that we forgot we're supposed to be on the same side." She paused. "And because the Blackwells sound insufferable, and I'd rather face them as a team than let them think they've won." Riker's expression shifted into something she hadn't seen before. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you. Thank me if we survive it." That night Celine woke from a nightmare she couldn't remember, but that left her shaking and gasping. The darkness felt alive, pressing in, suffocating. She'd had dreams like this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. Old fears wearing new masks, loneliness manifesting as monsters. Usually she rode them out alone. Lit candles, paced her room, waited for dawn and the relative safety of daylight. But tonight something broke. Some dam she'd built carefully to contain 8 years of accumulated pain and fear and loneliness. She heard herself cry out before she could stop it. "Riker." Just his name, said in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. Desperate, raw, stripped of every defense she'd built. Footsteps. Running. Her door flew open and Riker stood there in shirt sleeves, hair disordered, looking panicked in a way she'd never seen. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Celine sat up, pulling blankets around herself, mortified. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It was just a nightmare. Go back to sleep." But Riker didn't leave. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. "You were crying." "I'm fine now." "You're not." He moved closer, stopping beside the bed, looking uncertain. "You're shaking." She was. Trembling so hard her teeth would have chattered if she let them. Tears on her face she hadn't felt falling. The nightmare was fading, but the emotions it triggered remained. Abandonment, loneliness, the terror of dying slowly while everyone pretended not to notice. "Please go," she whispered. "I don't want you to see me like this." "Like what? Human?" Riker sat on the edge of her bed, actually sat there, crossing a boundary that had held for 8 years. "I've seen men fall apart after battle. I've held my father when he died. This doesn't scare me. It should. I'm a mess. So am I. We're both messes, Celine. We've just been hiding it from each other. His voice dropped lower. Tell me about the nightmare. It doesn't matter. It does, please. The please broke her. Celine closed her eyes and let the truth out. I was alone, walking through the fortress, but it was empty. Everyone was gone. I kept calling for help, but nobody answered, and I realized I'd been left behind, that I'd disappeared and nobody had noticed or cared enough to look for me. Her voice cracked. It's stupid. Just a dream. It's not stupid. It's how you feel, how I've made you feel. Don't. She opened her eyes, looked at him through tears. Don't take all the blame. I could have fought harder, could have demanded more, but I gave up too easily because it hurt less than hoping. They sat in darkness and silence, the distance between them smaller than it had been in years, but still vast. Celine could feel the heat from his body, smell cedar and smoke, and something distinctly him. She'd forgotten what it was like to have another person close, to not be entirely alone. I don't know how to do this, Riker said quietly. I don't know how to be what you need. All I know is work and control, and keeping everyone safe through force of will. But that doesn't work here. I can't command you to be happy or order this marriage to function. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest. Celine wiped her face with the back of her hand. We can't build anything on lies and performance. If we're going to try, it has to be real, even when real is ugly and hard. I can do honest. He met her eyes. I'm terrified of failing you worse than I already have. I'm angry at myself for wasting 8 years. I'm jealous every time Cade makes you laugh because I forgot how to do that. And I lie awake at night listening to you pace and hating that I don't have the courage to walk across the hallway and knock. The confession hung between them, raw and unpolished. Celine felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the ice that had formed around her heart. I pace because I'm lonely, she admitted. Because this room feels like a cage and I keep hoping something will change, but nothing does. Or didn't until 3 days ago. What changed 3 days ago? Your brother came home, and he looked at me like I was visible instead of furniture. And you looked at him looking at me, and for the first time in 8 years, I thought maybe you noticed I was here. Riker flinched. I've always noticed. I've been watching you fade for years and telling myself there was nothing I could do because you deserved better than what I could give. But I was wrong. You deserved honesty, effort, a husband who tried instead of one who gave up before starting. So what do we do now? I don't know. He stood, and she thought he was leaving. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. But I know I don't want to leave, not tonight. I'm tired of separate rooms and separate lives and pretending we're strangers. Celine's heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying... He turned to face her. I'm saying I want to stay. Not for anything except being here, being present, stopping the pattern of walking away because it's easier than staying. She should have said no. Should have protected herself from more potential hurt. But the loneliness was worse than the risk, and his honesty deserved honesty in return. Stay, she whispered. Riker returned to the chair beside her bed and settled into it with visible awkwardness. They'd never done this, shared space in darkness, been in the same room without purpose or agenda. It felt strange and tentative and somehow more intimate than anything physical could have been. Tell me something true, Celine said after a moment. Something you've never told anyone. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was relieved when you stopped trying to talk to me. Those first months, when you asked questions and tried to connect, it terrified me. I didn't know how to respond without failing. So when you retreated into silence, I told myself it was mercy. But really, I was just a coward hiding behind your pain. The admission hurt because it was honest. Celine had suspected as much, but hearing him say it made it real. I convinced myself you were cruel, she said, that you kept distance because you enjoyed having power over me. But I think maybe you were just scared, and I was too proud to see it. We've wasted a lot of time. Yes. Can we? He stopped, started again. Can we stop wasting it? Even if we don't know where this goes? Celine looked at him in the darkness, this man she'd married and never known, and made a choice that terrified her. We can try. They talked until dawn broke gray and cold over the valley. Small things at first. books they'd read, places they'd traveled before marriage trapped them both, memories from childhood that shaped who they'd become. Then deeper things. His father's death and the weight of responsibility that fell on shoulders too young. Her sister's letters begging her to come home and the shame of admitting failure. The years of loneliness, the accumulated hurts, the slow erosion of hope. By the time morning light filtered through her windows, they'd said more to each other than in 8 years combined. It wasn't fixed, nothing that broken could heal in one night, but it was a start. The first honest conversation in a marriage built on lies and maintained through silence. Martha found them that way when she brought morning tea. Riker asleep in the chair beside Celine's bed, still in his shirt sleeves. Celine awake but calmer, watching him with an expression Martha hadn't seen in years. The older woman set down the tray without comment, though her smile said everything. When Riker woke an hour later, stiff and disoriented, he found Celine sitting by the window with tea and morning light making her look younger than she had in years. "Good morning," she said, and it was the first time those words between them had felt like something other than obligation. "Good morning." He stood, bones protesting. I need to go. I know, you have work." She smiled slightly. "So do I, but maybe tonight we could talk again? If you want." "I want." The answer came quick and certain. "I'll be here." After he left, Celine sat with her cooling tea and thought about small miracles. One conversation didn't fix 8 years of damage. One night didn't rebuild trust. But it was something. A foundation they could build on if they were brave enough to keep trying. The fortress felt different that morning. Word spread quickly that something had shifted. Staff whispered about Mr. Holloway leaving Mrs. Holloway's room at dawn. Kate heard and smiled knowingly. James heard and hoped it meant his employer was finally waking up to what mattered. And in the valley below, Thomas Blackwell received reports that Riker Holloway seemed distracted, possibly vulnerable, definitely worth pushing. The meeting was still 2 days away. 2 days for Celine and Riker to figure out if one honest conversation was enough to face their enemies together. 2 days to see if 8 years of silence could transform into partnership. Neither of them knew yet that the Blackwell meeting would be the least of their concerns. That sometimes breaking meant breaking all the way down before you could rebuild. That the storm approaching had nothing to do with water rights or land disputes, and everything to do with the brutal cost of choosing to fight for something when surrender would be so much easier. All they knew was that something had changed. The ice had cracked, and underneath, after 8 years of frozen silence, there was finally fire. By noon, the entire valley knew something had shifted at Blackthorn Ridge. Ranch hands carried the story to settlements during supply runs. Merchants speculated in general stores. Even the rival families who'd spent years waiting for Holloway weakness to exploit sensed the change and didn't know what to make of it. Riker Holloway, the man who'd maintained iron control over his empire and his emotions for a decade, had spent the night in his wife's room. Not conducting business, not maintaining appearances, just being there, which was somehow more significant than any grand gesture could have been. Thomas Blackwell heard the news while breaking his morning fast and threw his coffee cup hard enough to shatter it against the stone fireplace. His wife, Margaret, watched the display with the weary patience of someone who'd witnessed 30 years of her husband's temper. "Control yourself," she said mildly. "Breaking dishware won't change anything. He's playing us." Thomas paced like a caged animal, his thick frame radiating frustration. Holloway's not distracted. He's consolidating, making himself look vulnerable while actually shoring up the one weakness we could exploit. His marriage was never our concern. His land is. Everything's connected with men like him. A stable home means stable leadership. If he's repaired things with his wife, it means he's paying attention again, which means our window for pushing boundary disputes just closed. Margaret set down her own cup with deliberate calm. "Then we push anyway." He agreed to the meeting. "We have witnesses to water rights violations going back 3 seasons. Either he concedes the disputed acres, or we take it to territorial court, and court battles cost time and money even when you win." Thomas stopped pacing and looked at his wife with grudging respect. She had a mind for strategy that matched his own, which was why their marriage worked when so many others failed. They were partners in every sense, united in ambition and ruthlessness. "You think he'll bring her to the meeting? If he's smart, he will. Show a united front, prove the rumors wrong, Make us look like we're attacking a solid foundation instead of exploiting cracks. Margaret stood and smoothed her skirts. Which is why we bring everything. Documents, witnesses, pressure from every angle. Make it clear this isn't about his personal life. It's about business he's neglected while sorting his household. And if that doesn't work, then we make it work. One way or another, we're getting those 300 acres. Holloway's controlled water access too long, and this winter showed how vulnerable that makes everyone downstream. She walked to her husband, placed a hand on his arm. This is about our survival, Thomas. Not revenge or pride. Remember that. He nodded, but his expression remained hard. Men like Riker Holloway didn't give up ground easily. This meeting would be a battle, and battles required weapons. If the Holloways wanted to present a united front, fine. He'd find a way to fracture it. Back at Blackthorn Ridge, Celine was discovering that one honest conversation didn't magically repair 8 years of damage. She'd woken feeling hopeful, which was dangerous in itself. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope meant caring about outcomes instead of just surviving them. She was in the conservatory again, her refuge, the one space in the fortress that felt like hers, when Cade found her. He entered with the casual ease of someone who'd decided social niceties were optional, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a knowing smile. "Heard you had an eventful night," he said, handing her one of the cups. Celine felt her face heat. "The staff talk too much. Always have. It's what makes this place interesting." Cade settled onto the workbench, completely at ease among the plants and dirt. "For what it's worth, I'm glad. About you and Riker, I mean. Watching you two dance around each other was getting exhausting. It's not fixed. We just talked. Talking's how you start. Everything else builds from there." He sipped his coffee, studied her over the rim. "You scared?" "Terrified." The admission came easier than expected. Maybe because Cade had a way of making honesty feel safe. "I don't know if I can trust him not to retreat again. And the Blackwell meeting's in 2 days, which means we're going to be tested before we've figured out what we're even doing." "Maybe that's good. No time to overthink, just react. See if you actually work together when pressure's applied." That's a terrible way to test a marriage. Marriage is terrible sometimes. Might as well find out now if you can handle terrible together or if you're better off apart. Cade set down his cup. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You're going to anyway." "Fair point. Do you still love him, or did 8 years kill that completely?" Celine looked at her plants, these living things she'd nurtured while her own life withered. "I don't know if I ever loved him. We barely knew each other when we married, but I think—" She stopped, searched for honesty. "I think I could, if he lets me. If we can build something real instead of just coexisting." "That's a start." Cade stood, stretched. "The Blackwells are going to come at you both hard. They smell blood in the water, and they've been waiting years for an opportunity. Just remember, whatever they throw at you, it's strategy. Don't let them make it personal." "Everything feels personal right now." "Then don't go into that meeting vulnerable. Go in angry. Anger's useful if you point it the right direction." After he left, Celine sat with cooling coffee and thought about anger. She'd buried hers for so long, channeled it into resignation and quiet suffering. But maybe Cade was right. Maybe anger was exactly what she needed. Not at Riker, or not just at Riker, but at everyone who'd watched her fade and said nothing. At a society that valued appearances over truth. At herself for accepting less than she deserved. That evening, Riker kept his promise and returned to her room. This time he knocked instead of running in panic. And when she opened the door, they both felt the awkwardness of new intimacy without roadmaps. "I brought these," Riker said, holding up a stack of papers. "Contracts and documents related to the Blackwell situation. I thought, if you're going to be there, you should understand what we're facing." Celine stepped aside to let him in, surprised. "You want to brief me? On business? You're my wife. You should know what's happening." He set the papers on her table, looking uncomfortable. "I've kept you separate from ranch operations for years. That was a mistake. You're smart and you deserve to be informed about things that affect your life." They sat together and went through the documents. Riker explained the water rights situation, the boundary disputes, the political complications of territorial law versus traditional use. Celine listened and asked questions that revealed she'd been paying more attention to Valley politics than he'd realized. The Blackwells are claiming you've diverted water that historically flowed to their property, she said, reading one document. But this survey shows the creek's natural course has shifted over 15 years. They're arguing against geography. Exactly. But if they can establish any pattern of our interference, even maintenance work to prevent flooding, they'll use it to claim intentional diversion. Have you interfered? We've maintained this creek bed, cleared debris, standard upkeep that benefits everyone, but they'll paint it as manipulation. Celine set down the document and looked at him. They're not wrong that you control access. Half the valley depends on water that flows through your land first. That's significant power. Power I've never abused. I know that, but they don't care about truth. They care about leverage. She paused. What if you offered something? Not the land they want, but assurances. Written agreements about water access, maybe creating a formal compact between ranches. Give them security without giving ground. Riker stared at her. That might work. Remove the fear without conceding the dispute. You sound surprised that I had a useful idea. I'm surprised I didn't think of it myself. He reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. I've been an idiot, keeping you locked away from everything that matters when you could have been helping, being a partner instead of just a wife in name only. You didn't trust me. I didn't trust myself. Didn't trust that I deserved help or partnership or anything beyond isolation. His voice dropped. I'm trying to change that, but I don't know how to do it perfectly. I don't need perfect. I just need you to keep trying. They worked through the rest of the documents together, Celine offering perspectives Riker hadn't considered, and Riker explaining complications she hadn't known existed. By the time they finished, they had a strategy that felt stronger than what he'd planned alone. We should sleep, Riker said finally, though he made no move to leave. Meetings tomorrow, and we'll need clear heads. You could stay again, if you want. Celine felt herself flush, but pushed through the embarrassment. Just to talk more. Or not talk, just to not be alone. I'd like that. This time they were both more prepared. Riker took the chair, Celine settled into bed with blankets and pillows arranged for actual sleep. They talked quietly about smaller things, childhood memories, books they'd read, the way winter sounded different depending on which room you occupied. Nothing profound, but the ordinariness felt profound anyway. This was what they'd missed. Not grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations, but simple presence, being together without performance or pretense. Celine fell asleep first, her breathing evening out while Riker talked about his grandfather building the fortress stone by stone. He stopped mid-sentence when he realized she wasn't listening anymore, just watched her sleep for a long moment, then settled deeper into the chair and let himself rest. Martha found them again in the morning, and this time she didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. 2 nights in a row. Progress was happening, however messy and uncertain. The day of the meeting arrived cold and tense. Riker woke stiff from another night in a chair, his back protesting and his mind already racing through strategies. Celine woke feeling more rested than she had in months despite everything, though anxiety quickly replaced peace. They dressed separately but met in the hallway after, a small moment of acknowledgement that they were doing this together. Ready? Riker asked. No, but I'm going anyway. That's all anyone can ask. The Blackwells arrived at noon with an entourage designed to intimidate. Thomas and Margaret in a fine carriage, 3 ranch hands armed and watchful, a lawyer carrying a thick folder of documents. They descended on Blackthorn Ridge like an invading force, and the message was clear. This was war dressed in civility. James met them at the entrance and escorted them to the library, where Riker had arranged the meeting. Celine waited in the hallway, smoothing her dark blue dress and trying to calm her racing heart. Kate appeared beside her, startling her. Breathe, he said quietly. They're just people, mean, ambitious people, but still just people. Easy for you to say. You're not walking into an ambush. Neither are you. You're walking into a negotiation where you hold more cards than they think. Big difference. He squeezed her shoulder briefly. Make them regret underestimating you. When Celine entered the library with Riker, she felt every eye in the room assess her. Thomas Blackwell stood by the fireplace, a broad man with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that looked permanently skeptical. His wife sat in one of the leather chairs, elegant and composed and clearly the sharper of the two. The lawyer hovered nearby, anonymous in the way of men paid to be forgettable. "Mrs. Holloway," Thomas said, his tone suggesting surprise. "Didn't expect you to attend business meetings? Thought your interests ran more to household management." The dismissal was intentional. Celine felt Riker tense beside her, but spoke before he could. "My interests run to protecting my family and our land. Since this meeting threatens both, I'm exactly where I should be." Margaret Blackwell's eyebrows rose fractionally. Thomas's skeptical expression deepened into something closer to respect, though he tried to hide it. "Well then," Thomas said, "let's discuss business. We have documented claims to water rights you've been violating for 3 seasons. We also have surveyed evidence that boundaries established 20 years ago have been ignored in favor of expansion that benefits your operation at our expense." Riker moved to the table where maps and documents were spread. "Your documents show selective interpretation. The creek's natural course shifted after heavy flooding in '78. We maintained the bed to prevent further flooding, which benefits everyone downstream. That's not diversion, it's responsible land management. Management that conveniently directs more water through your property. Management that prevented half the valley from flooding, including your southern acres. You're welcome, by the way." The tension ratcheted tighter. Thomas's face darkened and Margaret leaned forward, clearly preparing to escalate. This was the moment Cade had warned about, when strategy would become personal if they let it. Celine stepped forward before the argument could spiral. "Mr. Blackwell, you're right that water access is a valley-wide concern. It affects every ranch, every settlement, every family trying to survive out here. But attacking my husband won't solve the underlying problem." "And what problem is that, Mrs. Holloway?" "Fear. You're afraid that one bad season, one drought, one shift in creek flow will leave you without enough water to sustain your operation. That's legitimate. But the solution isn't fighting over land or boundaries. It's creating formal agreements that protect everyone." She moved to the table, laid out the proposal she and Riker had developed the night before. A water compact. Written guarantees of minimum flow to downstream properties. Shared maintenance responsibilities. An elected committee to handle disputes. Everything structured to provide security without Riker surrendering control of land that was rightfully his. Margaret Blackwell read through it carefully while Thomas paced and muttered. The lawyer studied every line, looking for traps. Riker stood beside Celine, presenting a united front exactly as planned, but she could feel his surprise. She'd taken control of the meeting in a way he hadn't expected. "This is more comprehensive than I anticipated," Margaret said finally, "but it still leaves primary water rights in Holloway hands. We'd be dependent on his goodwill." "You're dependent now," Celine countered. "The difference is this makes the arrangement formal, legal, and enforceable. If my husband violates the compact, you have recourse through territorial law. Right now, you have only accusations and hope." Pretty words, but what stops him from changing terms when convenient? The same thing that stops you from making false claims. Reputation and the cost of broken agreements. Celine met Margaret's eyes directly. "We all survive out here by honoring our word. This compact formalizes what should have been established years ago. It's not perfect, but it's better than fighting over boundaries while everyone wastes resources on lawyers and surveys." Thomas stopped pacing. "You're asking us to trust a Holloway, after years of them controlling access and making the rest of us beg for water during dry seasons. I'm asking you to trust a legal agreement backed by every ranch in the valley. My husband is willing to extend this same compact to every property owner. Make it a valley-wide standard instead of individual negotiations. That benefits everyone." The room fell quiet. Riker looked at her with something between shock and admiration. They hadn't discussed extending the compact beyond the Blackwells, but strategically it was brilliant. Remove the appearance of favoritism, create a system instead of a personal agreement, turn conflict into cooperation. Margaret and Thomas exchanged a long look, the kind of wordless communication that came from decades of partnership. Finally, Margaret spoke. "We'll need time to review this properly, and we'd want modifications, stronger enforcement language, clearer dispute resolution, but the framework is sound." "Take a week," Riker said, finding his voice. "Review it, propose modifications, and we'll establish a meeting with all affected property owners. Make this valley-wide like my wife suggested." Thomas nodded slowly, and Celine saw the moment when grudging respect replaced hostility. "Didn't expect this. Expected a fight, honestly. Maybe some yelling. I've done enough fighting in my life, Riker said. Building something stable sounds better. After the Blackwells left, promising to return with their lawyer's analysis, the library emptied until only Riker and Celine remained. He stood by the window watching the carriage disappear down the snow-covered road, trying to process what had happened. "You took over the meeting," he said finally. "I did. Was that wrong?" "No. It was—" He turned to face her. "It was exactly right. You saw the emotional undercurrent I missed, fear instead of greed, and you addressed it in a way that made them partners instead of enemies. I had help. We built that proposal together. You extended it in a way I didn't have the vision to see, valley-wide instead of individual. That changes everything." He crossed the room, stopped close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "I've been running this operation alone for 10 years. I thought that's what strength looked like. But watching you in there, that's real strength. Knowing when to fight and when to build." Celine felt her throat tighten with emotion she'd been holding back. "I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell. You looked calm and certain and completely in control. That's because you were beside me. If I'd been alone, I would have fallen apart." She paused. "This is what I've wanted for 8 years. To be your partner instead of just your wife in name. To matter in the parts of your life that matter to you. You've always mattered. I was just too much of a coward to let you close enough to see how much." They stood facing each other in the quiet library, 8 years of distance compressed into inches, both of them afraid to close the final gap and both knowing they had to try. Riker reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. When she didn't, he cupped her face with hands that shook slightly. "I don't know how to fix everything I've broken, but I know I want to try. With you. Actually with you this time, not at you or around you, but with you." Celine covered his hands with her own. "Then try. And I'll try too. And maybe between us trying, we'll figure out something that works." He kissed her then, tentative and careful, and nothing like the distant politeness that had characterized their relationship. It was messy and uncertain and felt like a beginning instead of a continuation. When they pulled apart, both were shaking. "That was—" Celine started. "Long overdue," Riker finished. "I was going to say terrifying, but that works too." They laughed, actually laughed together, and the sound felt foreign and wonderful and fragile. The next few days brought rapid changes. Word of the proposed water compact spread through the valley faster than wildfire. Other ranch owners appeared at Blackthorn Ridge requesting details. Some were supportive, seeing the benefit of formalized agreements. Others were suspicious, viewing it as a Holloway scheme to maintain control through legal manipulation rather than raw power. Riker and Celine met with each group together. She'd discovered a talent for reading people's concerns and addressing them before they could calcify into opposition. He provided the historical knowledge and technical expertise. Together, they were more effective than either could have been alone. The transformation wasn't smooth. Old habits fought new intentions constantly. Riker still retreated into cold control when stressed. Celine still defaulted to silence when hurt. They argued about strategy, snapped at each other when exhaustion shortened tempers, and had moments where 8 years of damage threatened to crush their fragile progress. But they kept trying. That was the difference. When Riker retreated, Celine called him on it instead of accepting the distance. When Celine went quiet, Riker pushed instead of letting her disappear. They were building something new from broken pieces, and the construction was brutal and ungraceful and absolutely necessary. Cade watched it all with satisfaction and growing restlessness. He'd come home to force confrontation, and confrontation had happened, but now his presence felt less necessary. The fortress was waking up, staff smiled more freely, and his brother was actually talking to his wife instead of avoiding her. His purpose completed, he started thinking about departure. "You're leaving," Celine said one afternoon, finding him in the stables. Cade looked up from saddling his horse, caught. "How'd you know?" "You get this look, like you're already gone mentally even though your body's still here." She leaned against a stall door. "When? Few days? Week, maybe? There's nothing keeping me here now." "Your family's here. My family's fine without me. Better than fine, actually functional for the first time in years. That's my exit cue." He cinched the saddle tighter. Besides, I'm not built for staying put. I get restless. Start causing trouble just to have something to do. You saved us. You know that, right? If you hadn't come back, Riker and I would have kept destroying each other through silence. You'd have figured it out eventually. Maybe. Or maybe we'd have both died alone in that fortress, too stubborn and scared to try. Celine moved closer. Thank you. For caring enough to push, for being honest when everyone else was too polite. Cade smiled, though something sad lived behind it. Take care of him. My brother's the strongest man I know and the most fragile. He hides it well, but he needs people more than he'll admit. I know. I'll take care of him if he lets me. He will. He's learning. Cade swung up into the saddle. And Mrs. Holloway? Take care of yourself too. Don't lose who you are trying to be what he needs. Partnership means both people get to be whole. He rode off into the cold afternoon, and Celine watched until he disappeared into the tree line. She'd miss him. His chaos had been uncomfortable but necessary, like lancing a wound so it could finally heal. That night, Riker found her in the library, staring at documents without reading them. He'd learned to recognize when she was somewhere else mentally. Cade's leaving soon, she said before he could ask what was wrong. I know. He told me this morning. Does that bother you? Yes and no. Yes, because he's my brother, and I've already lost 5 years with him. No, because he's never been good at staying put, and forcing him would just make us both miserable. Riker sat beside her. He did what he came to do, made us face what we'd been avoiding. Can't ask more than that. I'll miss him. So will I. But he'll be back. Men like Cade always come back, usually when you least expect it, and most need the chaos. He took her hand, an action that still felt new enough to be noteworthy. Besides, we don't need him anymore. We're figuring this out ourselves. Are we? Because sometimes I look at us and see progress, and other times I see two people who have no idea what they're doing. Both can be true. Progress doesn't require certainty. He squeezed her hand. How's the compact coming? 6 ranches have signed on. 4 are still skeptical. The Blackwells sent modifications that are actually reasonable. We might have something finalized by spring. That's because of you, your idea, your execution. Our idea, our execution. She turned to face him fully. I need you to understand something. This only works if we're actually partners. Not you letting me help occasionally while you maintain control of everything important. Real partnership, shared decisions, equal voice. That scares me. Why? Because I've spent 10 years believing that control equals survival. That if I'm not managing everything, it'll all fall apart. Letting go means trusting you to carry weight I've convinced myself only I can handle. And if I drop it, then we figure it out together instead of me cleaning up alone. He pulled her closer. I'm learning. Slowly and badly, but learning. You're going to have to be patient with me. I can do patient as long as you keep trying. The compact came together over the following weeks. Not smoothly. There were arguments, setbacks, ranchers who withdrew support, then returned, legal complications that required territorial involvement. But slowly, painfully, a framework emerged that protected water rights while maintaining individual property autonomy. The Blackwells signed first, which carried weight. Other ranches followed. By late March, as snow began melting and spring threatened arrival, 11 ranches had formalized the agreement. The valley had created something unprecedented, collective security, without surrendering individual control. The night they finalized the compact, Blackthorn Ridge held its first gathering in a decade. Not a formal dinner or business meeting, but an actual celebration. Ranch families came from across the valley, filling the fortress with noise and life, and the chaos of children running through halls that had been silent too long. Celine stood in the main hall, watching people laugh and talk, and exist in the space that had felt like a tomb for 8 years, and felt something break open in her chest. Not pain this time. Something else. Maybe joy. Maybe just the relief of surviving something that had tried very hard to kill her. You did this, Riker said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of wine. We did this. You started it. I just followed where you led. He handed her a glass. The valley's talking about you. The quiet Mrs. Holloway who turned out to be the smartest person in the room, the woman who saved everyone from a range war nobody wanted. That's dramatic. It's true. Without the compact, we'd have spent this spring fighting over boundaries and water. People would have died. The valley would have fractured. He touched her face gently. You prevented that by seeing a solution nobody else imagined. Celine leaned into the touch, this small gesture of affection that still felt miraculous. I just wanted to build something instead of watching everything fall apart. You built more than something. You built hope. He paused. I'm proud of you. Probably should have said that weeks ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud to be your husband, and I'm sorry it took me 8 years to realize what I had. She kissed him then, in front of everyone, and the gathered crowd erupted in applause and whistles. They pulled apart laughing, embarrassed but not ashamed, and Celine realized that for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Ridge, she felt like she belonged. The party continued late into the night. Children fell asleep on couches, adults drank and told stories, and the fortress filled with the kind of life it had been built for, but rarely experienced. Martha moved through the crowd with satisfaction, watching her employer and his wife dance awkwardly and happily, and thought about prayers answered in unexpected ways. As midnight approached and guests began departing, Riker and Celine stood on the fortress steps, waving goodbye to the last families. The valley stretched before them, dark and still beautiful under moonlight, full of life they'd helped protect. We're going to be all right, Celine said quietly. Yes, we are. Riker pulled her close, and she let herself be held, accepting the comfort and affection she'd been denied for so long. It won't be perfect. We'll still fight and make mistakes and hurt each other sometimes, but we'll survive it. Because we're trying. Because we're trying together. They stood like that until cold drove them inside. Two people who'd wasted years discovering they still had time to build something real. The fortress closed around them, no longer a prison, but a home. And somewhere in the valley, the world continued turning, brutal and beautiful and full of possibility for those brave enough to fight for it. Spring arrived slowly that year, reluctant and uncertain, much like the changes happening inside Blackthorn Ridge itself. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing dead grass and mud, and the promise of green underneath if you looked hard enough. The valley woke from winter's grip cautiously, as if afraid the cold might return and punish anything that dared hope too early. Celine stood in the conservatory on a morning in late April, watching rain instead of snow for the first time in months. The glass walls streamed with water, distorting the view but not obscuring it entirely. Beyond, she could see ranch hands working, cattle moving to fresh pasture, life resuming after the brutal pause winter always demanded. Behind her, she heard Riker's footsteps. She'd learned to distinguish his walk from everyone else's, measured but no longer quite so rigid, like he'd remembered how to move without armor weighing him down. James needs a decision about the northern fence line, he said, entering the conservatory. And Martha wants to know if we're hosting the valley meeting here or at the settlement hall. Here, Celine said without turning. We have the space, and it sends the right message. That Blackthorn Ridge is open instead of closed off. That's what I told her. He moved beside her at the window. You all right? You've been quiet this morning. Just thinking. About? She considered not answering, old habits suggesting that sharing doubts was weakness. But they'd promised honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. About how strange it is that everything's different but also the same. The fortress is still the fortress. The valley is still the valley. But somehow it all feels new. Maybe because we're new, Riker offered. Or trying to be, anyway. Are we succeeding? I can't always tell. He was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he didn't rush to reassure her. That was one thing that had changed. They'd both learned that sometimes questions didn't need immediate answers, just acknowledgement. I think we're succeeding at trying, he said finally, which is better than we were doing 6 months ago. Whether we're succeeding at the actual marriage part, that's harder to measure. But we're not failing, not anymore. Celine turned to face him. 4 months since that first honest conversation. 4 months of slowly rebuilding trust and learning how to be partners instead of strangers. It hadn't been smooth. They'd had arguments that ended with slammed doors and silence that lasted days. They'd hurt each other with careless words and thoughtless actions. They'd discovered that healing wasn't linear, that some days felt like progress and others felt like sliding backward. But they'd kept trying. That was the thing that mattered. When Riker retreated into cold control, Celine pushed back instead of accepting it. When Celine disappeared into quiet resignation, Riker followed instead of letting her go. They'd learned to fight productively instead of destructively, to apologize when wrong, to forgive when right. "Cade sent a letter," Celine said, reaching into her pocket. "From California. He's working on a ranch near Sacramento, says the weather's better, but the people are boring." Riker smiled slightly. "That sounds like him, always finding something to complain about." He asked if we're still talking to each other, or if we've reverted to silence. I think he's genuinely concerned we'll backslide the moment he's not here causing trouble. "What did you write back?" "That we're talking, fighting, and figuring it out. That he should visit in summer when the pass is clear. That we miss him." She handed Riker the letter. "He's proud of us, in his way. Says we're proof that even the most stubborn people can change if they get scared enough." "He's not wrong. I was terrified that night you had the nightmare. Hearing you cry out my name." Riker stopped, the memory still raw. "I realized I'd been so busy protecting myself from failure that I'd guaranteed it. Fear of losing you made me push you away, which meant I was losing you anyway. That's a special kind of stupid." "We were both stupid. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I stopped trying, which meant I hurt myself worse than you ever could." Celine took back the letter, folded it carefully. "My sister writes too. She wants to visit. Meet you properly. See if you're really as changed as I claim." "Am I?" "I don't know if you're changed or if you're just being who you always were underneath the armor. Does it matter?" "Probably not." He reached for her hand, an action that had become natural over months of practice. "Bring her here. I'd like to meet the woman who tried to rescue you from me. I owe her an apology for making rescue necessary." The Valley meeting 2 weeks later brought together representatives from 15 ranches, 3 settlements, and the Territorial Water Management Office. It was the formal ratification of the compact, the moment when months of negotiation became official policy. Celine had spent weeks preparing, working with lawyers to ensure the language was clear and enforceable, coordinating with ranch owners to address final concerns, managing logistics so the meeting would run smoothly. The fortress's great hall had been transformed. Tables arranged in a horseshoe so everyone could see each other, documents prepared in multiple copies. Martha had coordinated refreshments because even contentious meetings went better when people weren't hungry. The room hummed with conversation when Celine entered, voices bouncing off stone walls that had witnessed generations of Holloway business. Thomas Blackwell saw her first and nodded respectfully. Margaret did the same. Others followed suit, ranch owners who'd once pitied her or ignored her now acknowledging her as an equal. The transformation still startled Celine sometimes. She'd gone from invisible to essential not through grand gestures but through consistent competence, by showing up, doing the work, and refusing to disappear. Riker entered behind her and she felt the room's attention shift. He still commanded respect through presence alone, but now people looked between them as a unit rather than focusing on him exclusively. Partnership visible in how they moved through the space, checked in with each other non-verbally, presented as genuinely united rather than performatively so. The meeting lasted 4 hours. There were debates about specific language, concerns about enforcement mechanisms, questions about what happened when ranches changed ownership. Celine fielded half the questions, Riker handled the rest, and together they guided discussion toward resolution instead of conflict. When disagreements arose, they didn't steamroll opposition, but found compromises that addressed underlying concerns. By late afternoon, the compact was ratified with 14 ranches signing and 1 abstaining pending internal review. It wasn't unanimous, but it was sufficient. The Valley had created a framework for cooperation that would outlast any individual owner or dispute. They'd built something that could survive them. After everyone left, Celine found herself alone in the now empty Great Hall, surrounded by the detritus of successful collaboration. Empty coffee cups, scattered papers, chairs pushed back from tables. She felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "You did it," Martha said, appearing with characteristic timing. "Created something this valley needed for 20 years, but nobody had the vision to build. We did it, all of us together. Don't be modest. You saw what others couldn't. That cooperation was stronger than competition, that security came from agreements rather than power." Martha began collecting cups with efficient movements. "Mr. Holloway's grandfather built this fortress to protect against enemies. You've turned it into a place that creates allies instead. That's legacy, Mrs. Holloway. Real legacy. After Martha left, Celine stood in the quiet hall and thought about legacy. She'd spent 8 years believing she'd failed at the one thing expected of her, giving Riker an heir. The whispers had been constant, the judgment implicit. But maybe legacy wasn't just about children or continuing bloodlines. Maybe it was about changing things for the better, about building systems that protected people, about transforming places that had been prisons into homes. She found Riker in his study, working through paperwork despite the late hour. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the same exhaustion she felt reflected in his face. "Productive day," he said, setting down his pen. "Exhausting day." She crossed to him, and he pulled her into his lap without hesitation, another small intimacy that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "I've been thinking about something. Should I be worried? Maybe. I want to travel. Visit my family, see my father before—" She stopped, but they both knew what she meant. Her father's health had continued declining. Time was running short. "I've been away for 8 years, and I used our broken marriage as an excuse not to go home because facing my family meant admitting failure. But we're not broken anymore, or we're broken differently, and I need to see them. When do we leave?" The immediate we startled her. "You'd come?" "Of course I'd come. I should meet your family properly instead of the rushed formality before our wedding, and—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I want them to see that you're not miserable, that I'm not the villain they probably imagine, that we're actually building something real. It's a long journey. I don't care, we'll make it together." He pulled her closer. "Besides, James can handle ranch operations for a few weeks. Man's been itching to prove he can run things without me hovering. Might as well give him the opportunity." They left in mid-May when the pass was fully clear and travel was merely uncomfortable instead of dangerous. The journey took a week by train and carriage, crossing territories that shifted from mountain to plains to the gentler landscape where Celine had grown up. She watched Riker watch the changing scenery, saw him process how different her childhood had been from his own brutal frontier upbringing. Her family's estate sat outside Denver, a sprawling property that prioritized elegance over fortification. Gardens instead of defensive positions. Windows designed for light rather than watching for enemies. It was beautiful and soft, and everything Blackthorn Ridge wasn't. Her sister Caroline met them at the door, and Celine felt 8 years of distance collapse in an instant embrace. "You're really here. I'd stopped believing you'd come." "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. You're here now. That's what matters." Caroline pulled back, studied her. "You look different. Happier, maybe. Or just less hollow. Both, probably." Celine turned to Riker, who stood awkwardly holding luggage and looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen. "Caroline, this is my husband, Riker. Riker, my sister Caroline." Caroline's assessment was thorough and unapologetic. "So you're the man who made my sister miserable for 8 years?" "Yes. And now? Now I'm trying very hard not to." Riker set down the luggage. "I'm not expecting forgiveness or immediate acceptance. I know I've hurt your sister badly, but I hope you'll give me the opportunity to prove I'm capable of change." Caroline looked at Celine, silently asking for guidance. Celine nodded slightly, and Caroline's expression softened. "Come inside. Father's been waiting to see Celine. Fair warning, he's weak, but his mind's sharp, and he's got 8 years of protective father instincts ready to unleash on you." Their father sat in a library that smelled like old books and pipe tobacco, a blanket across his lap despite the warm day. He'd aged dramatically since Celine last saw him, his face gaunt and his hands trembling slightly. But his eyes were clear, and when he saw her, they filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "Celine, my girl." She crossed to him, knelt beside his chair, and let herself be held the way she'd needed to be held for 8 years. "I'm sorry, Papa. I'm so sorry I stayed away. You're here now, that's enough." He released her, turned his attention to Riker, and his expression hardened. "You're the Holloway boy. Man now, I suppose. You've kept my daughter from her family." "I have. That was wrong. I have no defense except cowardice and poor judgment." Riker met the older man's gaze directly. "I'm trying to do better. Whether that's sufficient is Celine's determination to make, not mine." "And what's your determination?" her father asked Celine. She took Riker's hand, a public claiming that meant more than any words. That we wasted years being stupid, but we're not wasting any more. That he's flawed, but trying. That I'm flawed, but trying. That together we're building something worth having. Her father studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. That's the most honest assessment of marriage I've heard. Most people dress it up in pretty lies. At least you two are clear-eyed about what you're facing. They spent 2 weeks with Celine's family. Long dinners filled with conversation and laughter. Days in the garden with her father, who wanted to hear everything about the valley, and the compact, and how she'd found purpose in a place that had tried to destroy her. Evenings with Caroline, catching up on lost time and rebuilding a relationship that distance had strained. Riker fit into the family awkwardly but genuinely. He wasn't charming or socially smooth, but he was honest about his mistakes and sincere in his efforts to improve. Celine's mother, who'd been coldly polite at first, gradually warmed as she watched how Riker treated her daughter, with respect, affection, and the kind of attention that spoke of genuine care rather than obligation. The night before they left, Celine's father asked to speak with them privately. They found him in the library again, looking even weaker but somehow more at peace. "I'm dying," he said without preamble. "Doctors give me a few months at most. I wanted to say it plainly so we're not dancing around reality." Celine felt tears threaten but held them back. "Papa?" "Let me finish. I've made peace with it. Lived a good life, raised 2 exceptional daughters, built something that will outlast me. But I needed to see you before I went. Needed to know you were all right." He looked at Riker. "You've hurt her. Don't think I've forgotten that. But you're also making amends, and that takes courage. Keep doing it, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "I will," Riker promised. "And Celine," her father's voice gentled, "you've always been the strong one, the one who endures, but strength isn't just endurance. Sometimes it's knowing when to fight, when to forgive, when to demand more. You've learned that. Don't forget it." "I won't." He died 3 weeks after they returned to Blackthorn Ridge. The telegram arrived on a morning when rain fell softly and the valley looked green and alive. Celine read it once, folded it carefully, and didn't cry until Riker found her an hour later sitting in the conservatory, surrounded by plants that grew despite everything, because growing was what living things did. He held her while she fell apart, said nothing because nothing would help, and just provided the presence she needed. Later, they would travel back for the funeral. Later, she would grieve properly and fully. But in that moment, she let herself break in her husband's arms and trusted he wouldn't let the pieces scatter. Summer arrived in full force, bringing heat and work and the constant activity of ranch life. The compact held through its first test when drought threatened the valley and water became scarce. Instead of fighting, ranches coordinated sharing and preservation based on the agreements they'd established. Nobody was happy about the restrictions, but nobody died and nobody's operation failed completely. The system worked. Celine found herself pulled into valley politics more deeply than she'd anticipated. Other ranch wives sought her advice on issues ranging from water management to settlement disputes. She'd become, almost accidentally, a leader in a community that had once ignored her. It was exhausting and fulfilling, and nothing like the isolated existence she'd lived for 8 years. One evening in late July, she and Riker sat on the fortress steps watching sunset paint the valley in gold and orange. They'd developed a habit of ending days this way when weather permitted, sitting together in comfortable silence or easy conversation, marking the passage of time with shared presence. "I was thinking about that first night," Riker said quietly, "when I told you we should keep our lives separate, that it would be cleaner. I remember. I was wrong about everything. It wasn't cleaner. It was cowardly. It didn't protect either of us. It just prolonged suffering." He turned to look at her. "I wasted the first 8 years of our marriage. I know I can't get that time back. But I want you to know I don't intend to waste any more. We both wasted it. I could have fought harder, demanded more, refused to accept your distance. But I was young and scared, and eventually I just gave up." Celine leaned against him. "The thing I've learned is that blame doesn't fix anything. Understanding does. We were both doing the best we could with what we knew, and what we knew wasn't enough. Now we know better, so we're doing better." "Are we doing better? Some days I still feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark." "We're doing better. Not perfect, but better. And better is enough. She paused. Martha told me yesterday that the fortress feels alive again, that there's laughter in the halls, and people aren't walking on eggshells anymore. That's because of us. Because we stopped hiding from each other and from life itself. They sat in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in colors that would fade but return tomorrow and the day after. The valley stretched before them, brutal and beautiful, full of people whose lives were interconnected in ways they'd helped formalize and protect. It wasn't paradise. Problems remained. They always would. But it was home in a way it hadn't been before. "Do you think we'll have children?" Celine asked suddenly. The question surprised them both. They'd avoided the topic, dancing around it because it carried 8 years of judgment and whispers and failure. "Do you want them?" Riker asked carefully. "I don't know. I spent so long being told I'd failed because I hadn't produced an heir that the whole idea became poisoned. But lately I've been wondering if maybe—" She stopped, searched for honesty. "If maybe I want the choice, not because it's expected or required, but because we actually have something worth passing on now. We have time. No rush to decide." He took her hand. "Whatever you want, whatever we decide together, that's what we'll do. No expectations, no pressure, just us figuring out our lives." Fall arrived with the first frost in September, and with it came Cade, riding up to Blackthorn Ridge unannounced and grinning like trouble on horseback. He'd been gone 6 months, and in that time he'd apparently worked 3 different ranches, gotten in 2 fights, and nearly gotten engaged again before common sense prevailed. "Place looks different," he said, dismounting in the courtyard where Riker and Celine met him. "Happier. Less like a fortress and more like a home." "We've made changes," Riker said, and the understatement made all 3 of them laugh. Cade stayed for 2 weeks, and his presence brought the kind of chaos that was entertaining rather than destructive. He told stories, flirted with the ranch hands' daughters, and watched Riker and Celine with satisfaction that bordered on smugness. "Told you talking would help," he said one night over dinner. "You told us to stop being idiots," Celine corrected. "Slightly different advice. Same result." Cade raised his glass. "To my brother and his wife, who proved that even the most stubborn people can change when properly motivated by fear and external pressure." "That's a terrible toast," Riker said, "but accurate." Cade drank anyway. "I'm leaving again in a few days, heading to Wyoming, but I'll be back next spring, and I expect to find you 2 still talking and maybe even smiling occasionally." "We smile," Celine protested. "Now you do. Before, you both looked like you were attending a funeral. Your own funeral, specifically." Cade's expression turned serious. "I'm proud of you both. I know that sounds condescending coming from the younger, reckless brother, but I am. You faced your failures and did the hard work of fixing them. That takes guts." After he left, the fortress settled back into routine, but the routine felt different now. Rich instead of empty. Full instead of hollow. Celine had taken over management of household affairs entirely. Riker consulted her on ranch decisions, and together they made choices about their shared future instead of living parallel lives that never intersected. Winter returned as winter always did, but this time it felt less brutal. The fortress was warm, filled with life and laughter, and the comfortable presence of people who'd learned to be together instead of simply existing in proximity. Celine and Riker spent long evenings by the fire, reading together or talking about plans for spring, and the silence between them was companionable rather than oppressive. On a night in early February when snow fell softly and the world outside was quiet, Riker found Celine in their bedroom now, not separate rooms but shared space, standing at the window and crying quietly. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned.
"Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, and it's overwhelming." She turned to him, tears on her face but smiling. "I was standing here thinking about where we were a year ago, how broken everything felt, how hopeless. And now," she gestured around the room, "now we're here, together, actually happy. And it feels impossible, but it happened." Riker crossed to her, gathered her close. "It happened because we fought for it, because we decided failing honestly was better than succeeding at pretending, because you were brave enough to keep trying when giving up would have been easier. We were both brave, eventually." She pulled back enough to see his face. "I love you. I don't know if I've said that plainly, but I do. Not the obligatory love of duty or arrangement, but actual love. The complicated, messy, hard-won kind.
I love you too, have for longer than I admitted, even to myself. Was too much of a coward to say it or show it, but it was there, buried under fear and stubbornness, but there. He kissed her softly. We wasted a lot of time. We did. But we have time now, years of it, if we're lucky. And I plan to use every moment better than we used the first 8 years. They stood together at the window, watching snow blanket the valley, and thought about time. How it could heal or harm depending on how you used it. How 8 years of waste could be redeemed by commitment to doing better. How love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice you made every day, especially on days when choosing felt hard. Spring came again, as spring always did, and with it came renewal. The valley bloomed, cattle moved to summer pasture, and the compact held through another season. Celine's sister visited, bringing her family and filling the fortress with the chaos of children who didn't know it had ever been a place of silence. The contrast was startling and beautiful. Life where there had been emptiness, joy where there had been resignation. One morning in early May, almost exactly a year after Celine and Riker had traveled to see her father, she woke feeling different. Not sick, just changed in some fundamental way she couldn't name. She knew before the doctor confirmed it 3 weeks later. New life building quietly while the world continued its routines. She told Riker that evening, watching his face cycle through shock and fear and wonder. "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to know. "I'm terrified," he admitted. And yes, happy. Overwhelmingly happy. He placed a hand carefully on her stomach, still flat but carrying possibility. "We're going to be better at this than we were at marriage." "That's a low bar." "True, but we cleared it eventually." He met her eyes. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the promise. Not that we'll be perfect, but that we'll keep trying. I can live with that." The baby arrived in January during a winter storm that made travel impossible and confined everyone to the fortress. A girl, healthy and loud, and completely unimpressed by her parents' fear and wonder. They named her Eleanor after Riker's mother, and watching him hold their daughter with shaking hands, Celine understood that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about building something new from the pieces. The valley celebrated with the kind of enthusiasm that surprised them both. Gifts arrived from every ranch, even the ones that had opposed the compact initially. The fortress that had once stood isolated and feared became a place people visited, bringing food and congratulations, and the communal joy of new life in a harsh place. Martha held Eleanor with the satisfied expression of someone who'd known all along that time and effort could work miracles. "Thought I'd never see children in this house again. Glad I was wrong." "So am I," Celine said, watching Riker walk the baby around the conservatory, pointing out plants she couldn't see yet but would learn to love. "We cut it close, but we made it. You did more than make it. You transformed this place." Martha handed Eleanor back carefully. "This fortress was built to keep people out. You've turned it into something that brings people together. That's powerful work." 5 years later, Blackthorn Ridge stood as busy and alive as it had ever been. 2 more children had joined Eleanor, a boy named Jack and another girl they'd named after Celine's father. The valley's compact had expanded to include 17 ranches and 4 settlements, creating a network of cooperation that had survived drought, harsh winters, and the inevitable disputes that arose when strong-willed people shared resources. Celine had become a valley leader in her own right, consulted on everything from water management to settlement disputes to how to integrate newcomers into established communities. Riker had learned to share power and decisions, and together they'd built something that was stronger than either could have created alone. One evening, with children finally asleep and the fortress quiet, they sat in their bedroom, the same room where Celine had once cried herself to sleep in loneliness, and looked at the life they'd built. "Do you ever think about those first 8 years?" Celine asked. "Sometimes. Usually with regret that I wasted them. I've stopped seeing them as waste. More like necessary foundation. We had to fail completely before we could learn how to succeed. Had to lose everything before we understood what mattered." Riker pulled her close, an action that had become as natural as breathing. "That's generous. I see them as years I stole from you through cowardice." "Then take the generosity. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we remember it." She kissed him softly. "Besides, I like our story. We didn't get it right the first time, but we got it right eventually. That's more honest than people who pretend they never struggled." You're saying our complete failure makes us inspirational? I'm saying our recovery from failure does. Anyone can succeed when things are easy. It takes real strength to succeed after you've destroyed everything and have to rebuild from ruins. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fortress settle around them. Somewhere down the hall, one of the children cried out briefly, then settled. Outside, wind moved through trees and the valley slept. Inside, two people who'd almost lost each other held on and counted themselves lucky. The story could have ended with tragedy, with two people locked in silence until death freed them, with a fortress that stayed cold and empty, a monument to wasted potential. But stories don't have to end the way they begin, and people, stubborn, flawed, complicated people, can change if they're brave enough to try. Blackthorn Ridge stood against the Montana sky, no longer just a fortress, but a home. The same stone walls that had witnessed years of silence now echoed with laughter and life. The same halls that had felt like prison corridors had become passages children ran through, leaving joy in their wake. The same bedroom where Celine had once thought she'd die alone had become a sanctuary where two people learned that love wasn't just feeling. It was choice, effort, and the daily commitment to be better than you were yesterday. In the end, survival wasn't about being the strongest or the hardest or the most controlled. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit failure, to keep trying when trying seemed pointless. It was about understanding that the brutal world would always try to freeze you, but warmth came from choosing to build fires instead of accepting the cold. Riker and Celine had learned that lesson the hard way, through years of pain and waste and accumulated small deaths. But they'd learned it. And in learning, they'd transformed not just their marriage, but themselves, their home, and the valley that had watched their struggle and witnessed their redemption. Some people would say they were lucky, that timing saved them, or that Cade's intervention was the real hero. But luck was just opportunity meeting preparation, and the real work, the brutal, ungraceful, necessary work, had been theirs alone. Two people deciding that the life they had wasn't the life they wanted, and having the guts to tear everything down and rebuild from honest foundations. That was the real victory. Not the happy ending, but the willingness to fight for one when surrender would have been so much easier.